welcome to another episode of Both Sides Now with your hosts Eve McCallum and Alex Martin. We're breaking down politics with the goal to break down political polarisation and get you engaged in the issues that matter. With that in mind, we've got a lot on the show this week. Before we get into it, Alex, how's it going?
It's going well. I can officially say that I am a year older than the last time we spoke. So celebrated my big 27 this week. Very exciting. I'm actually not sure whether I can say I'm still in my mid-20s or if I'm in my late 20s now.
I think potentially late mid.
Late mid. I don't know. I sent a message to my 17-year-old brother and I said, I promise I'm still cool and hip. And he was like, yeah, sure. So I don't know. Maybe I'm falling out with the youth. We'll see. But yeah, I'm well. I had a really nice, lovely week with friends and family and my colleagues. So I'm feeling good. Feeling really good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Just finished week 3 of my 4-week trial in Christchurch. I must say though, I spoke well of Christchurch last time, but I'm still loving Christchurch. The weather is amazing. We've had one or 2 grey days in the 3 weeks I've been down there.
Was it frosty?
Frosty, but just like beautiful blue, clear skies. Yeah, I am still thoroughly enjoying Christchurch. Classic weather chat from a Kiwi. Yeah. But yeah, no, and it's the first All Blacks game this weekend. So when this comes out, they'll have played their first game, but very excited to kick off All Blacks season.
Yeah, I think there are a few of us who are happy to put Super Rugby behind us and crack into Test Rugby. So I'm looking forward to it.
Has your boyfriend recovered?
No.
We'll leave it at that.
Other exciting thing, I gave my first oral submission in the past week to the Social Services Select Committee on the DSS bill. That was very fun. I only cried a little bit, so very proud of myself. It was really wicked to watch some of the Disability Support Services submissions over the course of the week. It was just like so courageous, so community. Like it just felt like the community for disabled peoples and their advocates, their family, their friends really just like stood up and got to say their piece. Very, very short 5 minutes to say said piece, but it was really cool. And I think hopefully now that the sort of band-aid has been ripped off in giving oral submissions, maybe I'll be keen to do that more on any other issues that I feel passionate about. So yeah, that was good.
Did you get any questions from any of the MPs?
No, I ran out of time. I also ran into some technical issues. It like started like sputtering and dropping out. So unfortunately, I think that soaked up a wee bit of my time, but that's all good. That's no worries. It was a really good.
Cool. It's really important, as you probably hear us talk about more and more on the show, like the Select Committee is quite an underrated part of the democratic process. It's sort of the easiest part where you can go and have your say. So I think that's really cool that you went on, did they? Broken the ice?
Yeah. It was a bit scary. But no, it was cool. And I guess moving on, we're in week 3 or 4 of FIFA World Cup madness. 2 of my teams, I think we spoke to the teams that we had in our sweepstake. 2 of my teams are gone now. So
there have been some good upsets in the playoffs.
The Netherlands.
Oh, and I think did Germany?
Yeah,
well,
Germany got knocked out too. Yeah, those penalty shootouts. Like I don't really care too much about football, but my heart rate when that is happening, I'm freaking out. So yeah. It's good to watch. Yeah. Good to have on.
Yeah, definitely good to see another sport that I wouldn't normally pay any attention to.
Yeah, 100%.
Now, getting into the political week, we're going to kick off with the Conservation Amendment Bill. And this is something that I'm sure you will have seen on social media. It's been kind of floating around quite a bit. But what I was keen to do is sort of chat to, I guess, in a little bit more in detail, because I think there has been a little bit of misinformation, a bit of hysteria that's been sort of going around on social media, at least from my perspective. So I kind of wanted to talk to sort of the 2 controversial areas of the bill. The first being the exchange and disposals of land, and the second being sort of what does it mean in terms of economics and conservation, and what is the government trying to do there. So I will note that the first part, the exchange and disposal provision, the government have agreed to remove, but I sort of wanted to talk to what they were trying to achieve with this and where I think the misinformation has come about. So basically what the government wanted to do is they wanted to make it provide a clearer framework and mechanism for the ability for DOC to get rid of land that it has no conservation value. And so these are things like gravel pits, old hospital sites, unused public hall reserves, stuff that doesn't really have any conservation value. And it's weird that you think the taxpayer is paying to own these things. And that was that's sort of what they were trying to do. And believe it or not, there's always been an ability in the current legislation to do this. So what they're proposing to do isn't new. They just sort of wanted to streamline the process and make it a little bit easier for these areas that the doc does need to get rid of. And I think I understand that as a bill, or as a legislation currently, about 30% was already able to be disposed of. Mm-hmm. But what the government have come out and done with the, well, they've removed it now, but what they were trying to do is, so they've said there's 40% of conservation land in New Zealand that you absolutely would not be able to get rid of. So these are your things like your national parks and that kind of stuff. What then happened is there's this other 60% of conservation land. And so I think what everyone saw floating around, what Forest and Bird and Greenpeace and those like organisations were doing, is they said, okay, this 60% figure, this is basically all this land the government has the ability to sell off. That is not at all what the intention was that they were going to do. I think there's been probably potentially not necessarily the clearest communications from the government on this, but then I think also that these advocacy groups, which I guess they have their right to do, have sort of picked this up and run with it. And so the government were never intending to sell off 60% of public land. These were just the 60% of stuff that isn't necessarily is obviously conservation land. And so basically the government, I think they've said, this is election year, we've seen a lot of uproar over this, we're just going to neutralise this and we're going to not do this. But I do think it's a bit unfortunate because I think there definitely are areas, as I said, like gravel pits and that sort of stuff, which clearly the government doesn't need to have. It doesn't hold any conservation value. And so they want to, and now it's now still going to be quite hard to get rid of these things. And the second thing that they're trying to do with the bill is, I guess, the more economic side of it. So they're trying to sort of clarify what role, also the interaction between conservation and the economy and sort of how we make money off conservation. And they were doing this by an amendment to Section 6 of the bill, in particular Section 6E. So essentially what they were wanting, Section 6E currently reads, to the extent that the use of any natural or historic resource for recreation or tourism is not inconsistent with its conservation, to foster the use of natural and historic resources for recreation and to allow their use for tourism. So that's how Section 6E currently reads. There's already sort of a little bit of a economic and tourism element to that.
Yeah.
What the proposed new wording is Section 6E is to foster the use of land and other natural resources and historic resources managed by the Department for Recreation to the extent consistent with their conservation. And then EA, to recognise the economic opportunities that arise from the use and development of land and other natural resources and historic resources managed by the department, and to enable this use and development for the greatest extent practicable under this Act and other enactments. So that's what they're proposing to change it to. Now, because Alex is looking a bit nervous here.
Oh, it's that fullest extent possible. We'll get to it.
Yeah. And look, ultimately what I understand and that's come out from the Minister Tama Potaka on this is where there's an ability to, they want money to be able to be made, and it's good, but the money is going to be reinvested back into the conservation. So if there's money being made off Fiordland National Park, then that money is going to get invested back into Fiordland. And it's also of note, more than 1,600 businesses already operate on public conservation land. So this has already happened. And again, I think they're trying to streamline things. And the reforms are expected to remove 30 to 40% of concession applications because it's currently really slow to get these concessions to work to do any sort of economic activity on the conservation land. And so they sort of wanted to sort of allow this to be streamlined. And also it's a really tough, and I'm sure Alex will have a view on this, it's a really tough balance around whether or not we should be making money off our sort of, national parks. But the reality is a lot of tourists and visitors come to New Zealand to embrace sort of our natural landscapes. There isn't, and those need to be maintained. So I don't actually have a problem with us making money off them, but it does need to be in keeping with the landscape. But you think of all our national walks and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Those tracks are beautiful, but they've got to be maintained somehow. So, we already currently make some money off them, but this is trying to help sort of tidy that process up and allow us to invest it back into the conservation. So I think that is also a really important part of it, that this money is going to go back into conservation. It's not going to go kind of into a whole big, government sloss funds. There's going to be no mining. I know that there's sort of been some, again, misinformation that this is going to allow Shane Jones to go and mine conservation land. Look, I'm sure he'd probably like to if he could.
Oh, he would love to. He would love to.
But that's not at all what the bill is trying to achieve either. So I think it's been quite interesting and a bit of a study of political behaviour around what the government's trying to achieve, what advocacy groups think they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But I also think a little bit, in fairness to some of the advocacy groups, because of the stuff that's happened this term in government, I think they just don't trust the government on conservation and on the environment. And so I think, while from what I've read, this is really well intentioned and it makes sense, I can see why there's that mistrust there. But I'd be interested, Alex, for your views on this and what you've sort of seen.
That's absolutely the conclusion I got to. Excuse me. That's the conclusion I got to as well, is that I think this government has been really poor in being able to establish trust when it comes to the environment. And as a result, you've got these non-governmental organisations such as Forest and Bird, who put together this map showing where the public conservation land is and what that sort of 60% of conservation land looks like and what is essentially up for grabs. I will concede that I do think Forest and Bird's map is a little bit scaremongery.
Nice, I'll quote that.
Don't clip it. I do think, but, heavy on the but, I think it is also really important to be able to show New Zealanders where our conservation land is, show what's up for grabs, and then I think because of this whole trust issue, there's a real give them an inch and they'll take a mile argument. And I think that should be concerning for New Zealanders, because what happens if we do elect a government that is a little bit, more careless when it comes to the environment and when it comes to conservation? Can we really trust that they're not going to just grab things and go, oh, well, it's in the rules, so we can do it? Because that's, I feel like, what this government does like to do. Be like, oh, it's in the rules, it was fine, it's perfectly legal, it's an entitlement. And that just rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, look, I think the point is that there's still going to be a strict statutory test around getting rid of this. They're just essentially trying to make it more streamlined and create a process where we can actually get rid of the bad stuff. But I agree, I can see how, people, when there is that mistrust, would see 60%, oh my God, the government's going to sell all of this off. But it's tricky, because I want to say trust the government, but I can see why people, from those advocacy groups don't trust the government. But I do think that the problem with that map is it doesn't tell the whole picture at all. I think there's a lot of nuance, and I always say explaining is losing, and the Forest and Bird have done a great job of capturing the message. Yeah. But yeah, I do think there's a lot more to it than just what that map shows.
I think there is too. I just think, though, the government has left it open for these non-governmental organisations, NGOs like Forest and Bird and Greenpeace, to be able to capitalise on that sort of narrative. And I don't really want to say evoke sort of fear. I think it more sort of, to me, has really, really shown me how much New Zealanders care about conservation land and how huge of a value it is to all of us, not only for what we get to enjoy when we look outside and go for a walk outside, but also what we know is a real draw card for tourism and all of those sorts of adventure things. The great walks, which sell out in the dock huts, for example, sell out in minutes after they're made available each year and stuff. So yeah, I think when it comes to the little pieces of land that are public conservation land but aren't really conservation, they're the dirt gravels, there's the Met Service building or something that's obviously not conservation. I just think lawmakers need to be more creative as to how they, one, legislate that, and two, convey it to the public.
Yeah, because I mean, I might not have been paying enough attention, but I think this kind of came out of left field, and I think that potentially the government could have done a little bit of a better job of the term rolling the pitch. So sort of like going around and consulting these different groups, getting them on side beforehand, saying, hey, look, this is the problem that we've got, particularly around the disposal. We've got this land, no value, it's costing taxpayers money. What do you think we should do about it? What are your views on it? And got people on the side first and had the conversation with the public before. Because it just seemed a little bit like it just kind of got released and they lost control of the narrative and they're like, oh my God. So I think that there could definitely have been some better sort of consultation and rolling the pitch, seeing what people think about it before they kind of come out with it. And also if you see what people think, then you can control the message a bit better because you know how to pitch it and who to pitch it at. But I will say is that the Environment Select Committee is hearing submissions on this bill at the moment.
And it got extended.
Yeah, which is awesome. So it's open till 12 p.m. on Monday, the 13th of July. So Alex, who now has made a submission, can tell you all about making submissions if anyone wants to know.
Yeah.
But I do encourage, like, if this is something that you're passionate about, because I think it showed that a lot of Kiwis are, definitely go and make a submission. But I would really encourage people to sort of, I guess, move beyond just the posts you see on social media. I have a personal pet peeve with, I see influencers mass share political messaging, just because I sort of think it's not that simple, and go and look behind a little bit more and see if you actually know what's going on.
I can agree to an extent, but I do feel like, if it does get people engaged and people talking about things, that's a good thing. It's kind of like, yeah.
My question is, are they actually talking about it, or are they just being like, this is the in thing, the trendy thing to do, so I'm going to share it?
Well,
that's me being facetious, but like, I think, look, if you're genuinely engaged and genuinely passionate about it, by all means. But I think probably make sure you know what you're sharing on mass before you do.
I think this whole conversation about conservation, to me, really does show that public pressure can also work.
Yeah.
That we do have access to our sort of like democratic voice, and for me, this is something that I think really shows where we are socially cohesive in this country. The environment and conservation, even though lots of people will have different views and opinions on it, how we capitalize on it, how we make the most of it, how we preserve it. I think a lot of people are in the same sort of bucket where they're like, no, let's try and protect our conservation land. That's what makes us Kiwi. There's a real common ground found there, and that's quite refreshing in 2026.
Yeah, I agree, and I actually also think it was interesting seeing just how much this issue kicked up.
Yeah.
But I also think credit to Tama Portaka, he saw that this was something that people were upset about, unhappy with, and he took action, and they've just agreed to remove those exchange and disposal provisions.
Yeah.
I think they're going to try and make some changes within the existing legislation. So I think it's really good to see that politicians do listen, and I think it echo your sentiment, like what you say, what voters say does matter. So I think don't be afraid to have your say, make a submission to select committee, talk to your local MP about things, because things do get changed.
Absolutely. I will touch on that second point that you spoke to about the Section 6E enabling that sort of like commercial exploitation, I will say. I take a lot of issue with that little phrase, to the greatest extent practicable, which is essentially being able to direct commercial businesses or entities or whatever, be able to get some money. I just wonder, how compatible is the value of economic development with the value of conservation? I think the way that this coalition views economic development, I would argue these two values aren't as compatible. And so, that's why we carve out areas that are to be protected, and we say you can't touch these. You've got so many people advocating for businesses and for money and things like that. It's a lot easier to advocate that. Who's advocating for the environment? Not the Ministry for the Environment.
No,
not anymore.
But I think, to be fair, I think the point I would make on that, though, is yes, we want to preserve conservation, but I think also that comes into the reality of, like, New Zealand does make, right or wrong, in tourism, we do make a lot of money off conservation. And, you think, and there are other areas as well, like you think of all the hunters that go out in conservation, and you see the great walks, like, the various different things that we do. Like, it's tricky because I do see what you're saying, but I think we've also got to face the reality that our natural landscape is part of where people come to New Zealand. People don't come to New Zealand to go to Auckland or Wellington, no offence to those of us who live here. Like we do, they're just other cities in the world. Like, what's unique about New Zealand is our natural environment. And so, we might as well make money off it, if we can, in terms of that, in that regard, like in terms of, if people are going to come here, charge them for it. Why should visitors be able to come here and use this for free? It costs money to upkeep all those walking tracks.
I agree. I think there should be a greater investment into our conservation.
I knew you were going to say that. There should be a greater investment in many things.
yeah, I could say that about
You've drunk
a lot.
the Green Party Kool-Aid on that one.
I think there should be a greater investment into conservation and that sort of environmental protection. And I just don't think that we need to sacrifice our environment and our conservation for greater economic benefits. I think we just need to be more creative about how we can build a sustainable economy and I guess, get that money back, be able to reinvest that into conservation and into the environment without, exploiting our beautiful whenua and our awa, and I just don't want it to all turn to shit. We shall move on. Let's move also to another issue, sort of question, about tama pōtaka this week. I guess it's not been the easiest
Been
week
a busy couple of weeks for Tama.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to housing, homelessness, and the Ministry of Social Development, or MSD. So another hot topic in the past couple of weeks has been that of homelessness and housing, and I guess quite tacked onto that, the move-on orders. That's something that I think submissions are now closed for, but something that I think did generate a lot of discourse online about how we deal with people who are causing public disorder in public spaces, and people who I guess are rough sleepers, are homeless, causing maybe issues in our public sort of areas. Now you might be thinking, why is this relevant to me right here, right now? Well, I think homelessness should be an issue for all New Zealanders. And Tamitha Paul, Green MP, has some statistics that we've got 57,000 women homeless, and half of all homeless people are under the age of 24. So
That's crazy stats.
Yeah, this is an issue that actually affects a lot of, I guess, our sort of peer group, and something that I think should be in the back of our minds when we perhaps go to vote in, 4 months' time? 3 months? 4?
3.5, yeah.
It's getting close. Now, I guess I just want to caveat that homelessness in New Zealand, or homelessness anywhere, is a really complex issue, and it's not something that I think we're going to be able to adequately address in, say, 15 minutes. But it's a really complex issue. There are people who have a lot of needs when it comes to homelessness, and it's not something that can be just sort of like addressed, I think, by creating more affordable housing. I think there is probably like a Venn diagram sort of aspect to it where, you know, if there is more affordable housing, then homelessness will be able to be addressed in some meaningful way. But it's a bit of a wicked problem with a lot of people being, say, mentally unwell, disabled, issues of domestic violence that impacts homelessness. But there are some statistics that at the moment we are facing our highest levels of homelessness in recorded history. One thing that I think has impacted that statistic are the government's changes. I think it was about 2 years ago in 2024. The government made it harder, essentially, to access emergency housing. So there's some specific criteria that somebody who wants to access emergency housing needs to fit. So it depends on whether you are a New Zealand citizen, how much you earn, how much money you have in the bank, and whether you have an immediate housing need. I think one of the kickers of the changes that was made a couple of years ago was that now these people need to be able to provide supporting evidence to show that they are of this sort of like immediate need. And I think while it seems fair that you show evidence that you are of need, I think we also need to appreciate that the people trying to access emergency housing obviously, may not be able to have the ability to adequately show and convey that they are of need. And then secondly, they also strengthened the Ministry of Social Development, MSD's abilities to sort of enforce the rules for people who aren't meeting their obligations in emergency housing, which, I don't know, it's a bit tricky. So the government set targets that they wanted to reduce the amount of people who are in emergency housing, and they set that target for, I think, like 2030, and it's 2026. They've met that target. They've absolutely blown it out of the water. Now, on the face of that, that sounds like a really good thing, but if we've got people saying that homelessness is the highest it has been in recorded history, I'm just wondering, when people apply or go to MSD for emergency housing and the likes, if they are declined emergency housing, where are they going? We don't have any sort of information as to whether these people are being redirected to other sort of means of support, or whether their issues have been resolved. And that's really concerning to me, because it feels like, are they just ending up on the streets? I don't know about you, but I feel like we've both been in Auckland now for, say, 3 years, going on 4. I would say that I personally have seen more people rough sleeping in the Auckland CBD central area. And that's really concerning to me. And look, that's just my view. It could very well be sort of biased by these sort of statistics and things, but that's what I have seen. So it is worth noting that emergency housing applications and people getting into emergency housing has been dropping, especially since COVID, when there was a huge uptick. And I think the then Labour government was popping people into motels.
Yeah, which is also not a great place to put people.
No. I kind of balance that with the fact that it was in COVID, and I don't think COVID is necessarily the big, COVID, so let's just wave the problem like it was an unprecedented time sort of thing. But it also was. And so it's a really tricky thing. I'm glad that these people were able to get shelter, because that's a basic human right.
Yeah, I think as you said, it's a very complex issue, and I think I'm not across, I guess, the stats of it enough. But I think when people become homeless, I think it shows so many different things that potentially gone wrong in their life. A lot of them have mental health issues, addiction issues. If women, it could be because of family violence. There are so many different, very complex things.
Systemic racism.
Yeah, very complex things that have gone on. And I think that all governments, whether people would agree or not, but I think all governments, this is an issue that governments do recognise and do want to deal with it. I just think it's so complex to deal with. And I think that, we previously on the podcast, when we did interviews, we used to have a question to our speed round, which is it realistic to have 0 homeless people? Which I think is a fascinating thing to think about, because I think if you have 0 homeless people, it says that you've solved a lot of these issues we have, big issues in society: mental health, addiction, family violence, poverty, all these kind of different things that lead to people being homeless. It says that you've solved. And I mean, man, it would be awesome if we could solve all of these, but it's so hard to solve some of these things. And some, you get some people that are very, very unwell that end up on the streets. And so it's kind of like, where do you start? I think the other point you raised as well is on the sort of toughening up of tenants in emergency housing, kaingoa tenants. That's a hard one, because I think that, again, if people don't have a house, it's really hard to address any of the other issues going on. But in the same breath, if you've got someone living in a kaingoa or a housing block, and they're causing, potentially putting other people in a lot of harm and danger, then I can 100% see why the government has, toughened up on that and actually, kicked a few people out of their homes, because it's like, well, at the end of the day, you are there, and it's in a house that you don't pay for emergency housing, I understand, or do they pay? Maybe they pay a little bit.
I think they pay perhaps 30% of their
market rent or
their income or
something. So you're not paying very much for it. It's heavily subsidised by the taxpayer, and I think and I acknowledge that, that some of these people are super unwell, so we don't necessarily have the ability to be able to respect it. But I think that, there are plenty of other people living around them, and lots of people who have a need for emergency housing. And it's sort of like, would you how do you prioritise people? And I think, as I said, it's very tough. But, at the end of the day, there has to be some lines drawn in the sand. And if you're going to be an absolute menace and put other people's safety at risk, then I can 100% see why they've been kicking people out. As I said, not to say that none of this isn't very complex, but I think that's kind of, I guess, where I probably sit on it as well. And yeah, man, I think Tama's job of being in charge of the emergency housing and social housing, incredibly difficult.
And then you move to the move on orders aspect of it all. So I guess if you're not aware of the move on orders, though it has, I think, created a little bit of a fuss online, the government has introduced legislation that will enable police to move on people displaying antisocial or threatening behaviour in specific, I guess, public areas for 24 hours. Contravening a move on order could mean that person is criminalised. And I'll also note that this applies to people from the age as young as 14 years old. So I think Oranga Tamariki has submitted on the Move On Orders bill, and they were like, hey, 14 years old, that's quite young. So the government says that this is going to keep the streets safer, and it is going to assist businesses, because you may often see rough sleepers parked up in front of businesses, or again, that sort of like threatening behaviour. Business owners aren't equipped to deal with people who are disorderly in public. And I think those needs of business owners is really important and does need to be considered when we think about this. But some interesting statistics, I think, is that the police themselves have said that public disorder is actually at its lowest level in about 10 years.
Interesting. I actually didn't pick that up. That's really interesting.
So I'm just kind of wondering what's the point of Move On Orders if we're seeing homelessness rise, public disorder is actually getting lower, and you're just going to move people on to where? Like, where do they just move on to another area and continue to cause? Like, it just feels like a terrible sort of band-aid approach that doesn't actually address the underlying issues. And as we said, complex, difficult, can't solve it all. And I don't think that's necessarily what the government is trying to do with these new abilities for the police to move people on. But it just feels kind of nasty.
Yeah, I think the tricky thing is that I actually didn't pick up that stat that the police said public disorder is at its lowest it's been for a while, which is really cool to see. I think the problem is, or the perception is, of Annika's perception for a lot of people is reality, even though it's not necessarily always the truth. But I think the perception is that you get, the classic example is people get off a cruise ship at the bottom of Queen Street, and then they walk up Queen Street and they see rough sleepers, and it's not a particularly great view of New Zealand. Now it's a bit of a realistic view because this is still a problem, and I don't necessarily support governments that try and hide this problem, but it's like we talked about with the balance of conservation and the economy. It's the same thing here. It's like the balance of the economy and social needs. It's quite again, it's that sort of tension around how do you make that work. Sad thing is, probably when they move on, they probably will just be moved to another suburb. I don't think these move on orders though are the intention of them. Unfortunately, isn't to try and fix the problem of homelessness. It's just, I think, it's purely just something to help businesses. It'd be interesting to see how much police actually use them and how much they get enforced. Like, it'll be interesting in a year's time once they've been in place for a year, how they actually go and if they use much, or if the police can, because the police have currently already got powers, to deal with people that are being disorderly. So it'll be fascinating to see what actually happens with these in reality.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. I think my response to the point you made about people coming off cruise ships and seeing rough sleepers in Auckland CBD is that I would honestly put the social need of these people higher than that economic impact, whatever that economic impact might be. Let's really awkwardly pivot from a really rough topic to something else, and that is, again, opportunity. They've been floating around in the media, and perhaps we might speak to that too. But Eve, you've done a little bit of your own research, a little bit of a stakeholder feedback, if you will. What's on your mind this week about the Opportunity Party?
Yeah, so I feel like we probably talk about them a disproportionate amount, but it's been fascinating. So in the last couple of weeks, we've seen two polls out. A TV1 poll had them on 4.6%, and a Roy Morgan poll had them on 6.5%.
Sheesh.
Which is fascinating. Roy Morgan, things bounce around a bit more, but to have them on a TV1 poll at 4.6% is really interesting. And it's also been quite interesting talking to my dad about this, because there's very much that narrative going around that they're just a left-wing party, like they're only going to go with Labour. And I do think they're probably taking most of their votes off Labour at the moment, if I was being honest. I just think Labour's votes dropping, you can see. And so some of the policies do tend to lean more left. But I was like, okay, well, why are people of our generation interested in opportunity? So I chatted to a few of my friends, and I thought, I'd share some of the sort of comments that I've had back, because I think that, for both National and Labour, they'll be worried about opportunity. I think, if you're going to actually figure out how you stop bleeding votes, then you've got to first understand why people are looking to them in the first place.
Yeah.
And you've actually got to be prepared to listen to that. You can't just say, oh, they're just another left-wing party, or, or you should, like, if you're Labour, or, you know, oh,
they're going to go with
they're going
to go with the coalition.
National.
Yeah.
Like,
I think that is a real, like, to me, that shows that whatever Opportunity's doing it right.
100%. So some of the comments that I had from my friends is they like the idea of a reasonable middle ground, which they think the Opportunity give. Their policy appears to be based on research, and they point to the research and just say, see, this is what works. They have no embarrassing politics where they just try and belittle the other party, which I think is a fair point, because I do think that happens quite a lot, and that's politics, right? But it does happen. Tax policy is fairer, but they acknowledge that, you know, because we're a generation, most of us don't own our own assets yet. They align with both being pro-business and pro-environment, which, again, the environment's something important to our generation. They don't have the baggage of the legacy political parties. They haven't had any really shit social policy yet, which, you know, the current coalition government have had some social takes that are a bit average. A lot more wriggle room for pragmatic policy. And then kind of building on that sort of, like, policy takes and just, you know, belittling the other parties. A lot of people say that they don't like the slam style of politics that we see from parties, when they say, and this party is just bad, so don't vote for them, vote for us.
Yep.
Especially for professionals, you know, and, you know, people in our generation who, I guess, we are educated, and, you know, we can kind of see beyond that. So why do they do that? Interesting thing that's come out from Opportunity, which I don't agree with, but they've got a proposal to plan to wipe 3 years of interest off your student loan when you go overseas, so that people will come back to New Zealand, and there's a requirement you have to stay in New Zealand. Because if you don't know, if you've got a student loan currently, when you go overseas, I think it's after 6 months or a year, interest starts accruing on that. And there's a little bit of a problem, but there's many stats come out as to how much of a problem this is. There's a bit of a problem where people go overseas and then just don't pay any of their student loan off, so they rack up a massive big bill of interest on it, and then some people don't end up coming home because they're going to get arrested at the border and they've got this big debt they owe. Now, my view on this has always been, look, if you get a student loan, you know, it's your responsibility to pay it back, and you go overseas, you know, you choose to go overseas, you know you've got interest, you know you've got to pay it back. So my view definitely as well, if you rack up a big interest bill, that's kind of your own problem, and I don't think the government should be forgiving it, and I don't think that people who don't go to university should be subsidising those who do go to university. But I think that's it's an interesting viewpoint of trying to help encourage people to come home. But I'd love to see some more stats on how big of a problem this is.
Yeah, I think it's a real interesting one. Like when we spoke to Kule Wong, the leader of Opportunity, she said that the sort of typical Opportunity voter would be somebody who's, I guess, like a policy nerd who may have some tertiary education and is really interested in the environmental stuff, perhaps some economic stuff, and would be dissatisfied with maybe the two major parties. I think on the student loan stuff, my personal stance is that I think tertiary education should be free. I see it as a public good and something that, you know, we can all invest in. We're investing in our future. You know, it actually wasn't that long ago, but it was long enough that I didn't get to benefit from it, that you could go to university and come out with bugger all debt. You were paid to go to university.
My dad was paid to go to university. He was in that generation.
Damn, I'm so jealous.
But yeah.
But yeah, I think obviously we need to deal with what we have now, and that is that if you do go to university, you know you're going to pick up a decent student debt unless you are incredible enough to get a whopping scholarship and cover that. You're certainly not getting any first year or final year fees free these days. But I think it is also very well known that if you do leave the country, you are going to get interest on your student loan. And I don't actually, honestly, while I do think that it should be free, tertiary education, dealing with the facts as we know it now, I kind of feel like, well, you know you're going to get into debt, you know you're going to accumulate interest if you do leave the country, so I think you need to plan for that. I don't quite know where I sit on whether it's worth, at this point of time, addressing interest as an issue. and waiving or wiping some interest off for people who are coming back.
I just also wonder if this policy is a little bit like the first year fees free policy, where those who ultimately really only benefit is those kind of middle class people who go to, who can afford to go to university in the first place, and, the sort of middle class people who can afford to go and do an OE. And I know the purpose of it is we want to get people back in New Zealand, but I do think a lot of people come home anyway, and I don't know, it just feels like it's sort of a policy that will, it would benefit, for example, someone like, you and I probably go and do an OE at some stage. It'd massively benefit us if we could get 3 years of, and, not pay any interest for 3 years. I know when we're overseas, that's essentially just going to allow, like middle class to upper class people to go and do an OE and no consequences of not paying back a debt. Like, if you have a mortgage, you have to pay your mortgage back,
Yeah, well, I do wonder, like, is there a social good of people going overseas and getting overseas experience in whatever way, shape or form that looks like, and then coming back? I guess that's how I would probably try to justify it. Like, are these people who are heading off for 3 years, going and exploring the world and finding bright new big ideas for New Zealand and bringing them back and making everything better? I don't know. Probably in some ways, perhaps, yeah. Enough to justify wiping interest. I'm not too sure. Might be something I look into a bit further.
Watch the space.
Yeah.
So to finish off, as I alluded to before, we're going to do social media moment of the week. And we've got a good one this week.
We do. You may have seen this in the news. If you haven't, don't worry about it. Or you may have seen it on your timeline. So the National Party posted a video in response to the Green Party's new tax policy announcement. It is an AI generated video.
It's kind of awful.
And it basically, we'll put it in the show notes, but it basically calls out the Green Party in the normal way that the National Party does, and being like, the Greens just want to tax you more and they're going to just go tax. And Chloe Swarbrick, co-leader of the Greens, replied to that AI slop video saying, "Hey, at Christopher Luxon, debate me instead of hiding behind this sad, economically illiterate AI slop of misinformation and fear-mongering. Do you understand how progressive taxation works? And do you recall one of the first things you did when you came into power was revoke IRD's ability to investigate and report on the unfairness of our tax system? I wonder why." I think this is a really hilarious, like, it's serious, but I think it's a really hilarious interaction between Chloe Swarbrick and the National Party. And the video itself is just so bizarre. It's got the American accent over the top, and that,
and it was honestly like one of my biggest problems with it. I was like, this doesn't even sound like a New Zealand political ad. Like, I have no problem with political, like, ads, and of course politicians are going to go at each other. Yeah. Absolutely fine. But I was like, why the American accent? Like, can you not just put a Kiwi accent? Surely AI can produce a Kiwi accent.
Oh, I'm sure.
Or have a voiceover of, like, Chris Bishop or Christopher Luxon, or something like that. Why the American voice?
Because algorithm, because that's what will do well on social media. So many people are used to consuming videos where it's got that very typical American narrator voice over top. And what we are so used to, just like growing up infiltrated by so much American content. I think it will just do well on social media, and I think that's what the National Party, whoever's doing their socials and stuff, realised and what they did.
But doing well on social media, it might mean it gets a lot of views. But like, I'd be fascinated to know, because I had a brief look at the comments, but the comments were all pretty negative about the video. And so I was like, And I also just think in a world where people are sort of like craving authenticity, people are, everything's sort of over-generated and overproduced and AI and stuff. People want authenticity. Why can we not, like, just have a Kiwi accent on it? And I get the whole algorithm thing, but I'd love to know if it's, like, actually helping.
Probs not.
Yeah, like, I was just like, I don't know. Again, maybe being naive as to how social media works, but I was like, surely this isn't winning any votes in New Zealand.
No, but I mean, I guess it's sparking a conversation. That's like the only silver lining I can probably take from this interaction.
Yeah, we're talking about the video, and then National then responded to it.
Yeah, well, I mean,
with another AI video.
God, I haven't actually seen that, but it did give the Greens an opportunity to clarify, and I think what has not been picked up on appropriately by some people in their tax policy, they are bringing in a higher tax rate for people who earn over $160,000, but that applies only as a marginal tax rate.
Yeah.
That applies only once you have earned
160, yeah. And that's 45% of everything over 160,000, right? It's not 45% of 160,000, which I'm not at all a fan of that policy at all. I think that's way too high. But I will say that we do, like, it's important to get the information correct. You know, like we talked about the fact that, you know, the left have been spreading misinformation about the conservation bill. I will acknowledge, you know, that's also misinformation about the Green Party policy. It's like they're not going to tax like 45% of your $160,000. That's not how tax works.
Thank you so much for listening this week. Please follow or subscribe. Follow us on social media and hit subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're on Apple, if you're on Spotify, wherever you are, it makes a huge difference to us. And tell a friend as well. Share it around. Let other people know. And otherwise, we'll see you next week.